You use it every day. It sits on your table. It is in almost every food you eat. It is so ordinary that most people never think about it for a single second. Salt. And if you had asked a prehistoric human where to find it, they would have known exactly where to go. Not because salt was ordinary to them, because it was essential. Because the human body runs on sodium in ways that are not optional and not negotiable, and finding salt in a world with no salt shakers, no grocery stores, and no packaged food was one of the defining challenges of prehistoric human life. The story of when humans started eating salt is not really a story about a condiment. It is a story about biology, about what the human body genuinely needs and why. It is a story about the transition from one kind of diet to another that changed the salt equation entirely. It is a story about some of the earliest trade networks in human history, the earliest known mining operations, and a substance so valuable that it functioned as currency across multiple continents for thousands of years. And it begins not with ancient mines or trade routes or Roman soldiers, but with a simple biological fact that has been true for every human being who has ever lived. Your body cannot make sodium, and without it, you die. For most of human evolutionary history, the long hunter-gatherer period that shaped everything about human biology, getting enough sodium was probably not a serious problem. And the reason is simple. Meat contains sodium. Blood contains sodium. Organ meats like liver and kidney contain significant amounts of sodium. A diet built substantially around animal protein provides a meaningful baseline sodium intake without any deliberate salt seeking required. This is why carnivores in nature rarely seek out salt licks. Their food already contains the sodium they need. Salt-seeking behavior in the wild is most strongly associated with herbivores, animals eating grass, leaves, and plant material that is very low in sodium relative to their needs. Deer, elephants, cattle, horses, plant eaters with high sodium demands and low sodium dietary intake actively seek out salt deposits, mineral springs, and salt licks to supplement what their diet cannot provide. Early humans eating a diet that included substantial animal protein were in a fundamentally different position from humans eating primarily plant foods. Their food was doing the sodium work for them. Salt as a thing to be sought, mined, traded, and valued simply was not a pressing concern in the way it would later become. The moment everything changed was the agricultural transition. When human populations began transitioning to agriculture, beginning roughly 10,000 years ago and spreading across the world over the following several thousand years, the sodium arithmetic changed completely and dramatically. Grain is very low in sodium. Vegetables are very low in sodium. A diet built primarily around wheat, barley, rice, millet, and root vegetables provides a fraction of the sodium available from the meat-heavy diet of a hunter-gatherer. Agricultural populations eating primarily plant foods were, for the first time in human evolutionary history, consistently undersupplied with dietary sodium. And they could feel it. The physiological drive to seek salt is real and powerful. The craving for salt that most people experience is not a cultural preference or a learned habit. It is a genuine biological signal. The same mechanism that drives herbivores to salt licks driving humans to seek supplemental sodium when their diet is not providing enough. This is the moment when salt becomes something humans actively seek and value. Not gradually, not for taste, but urgently, biologically, because the body is demanding it and the agricultural diet is not delivering it. The timing is not coincidental. The oldest confirmed evidence of deliberate human salt production and extraction coincides remarkably closely with the spread of agricultural populations. The earliest known salt production site yet discovered dates to approximately 8,000 years ago, in what is now Romania, a location where brine springs were being deliberately evaporated to produce solid salt. This is a sophisticated operation. It requires understanding that the water contains something valuable, knowing how to extract it, and having enough demand for the product to make the effort worthwhile. 8,000 years ago, agricultural communities existed in that region. The connection between the farming diet and the salt production operation is almost certainly not accidental. But 8,000 years ago is not the beginning of the story. It is the beginning of the archaeological record for deliberate salt production. The actual beginning goes back considerably further, into the hunter-gatherer period, before agriculture, before permanent settlements, before anything we would recognize as civilization. How do we know this? Because of the animals. Salt licks, Natural mineral deposits, where sodium and other minerals leach out of the ground, attract large concentrations of animals. Deer, bison, mammoths, horses, any large herbivore in the area will visit a salt lick regularly and predictably. This makes salt licks extremely valuable to hunters. They are, in effect, guaranteed hunting grounds. If you know where the salt lick is, you know where the animals will be. Hunter-gatherer populations almost certainly knew exactly where every salt source in their territory was located, not because they needed the salt themselves in the way agricultural populations would later, but because the salt attracted prey. The knowledge of salt geography was hunting knowledge. It was survival knowledge. The transition from knowing about salt sources because of the animals they attracted to visiting those salt sources directly for the mineral itself is not a large conceptual leap. And the evidence that prehistoric humans were consuming mineral-rich water and deposits from natural salt sources almost certainly predates any archaeological record we are likely to find, because licking a mineral spring or consuming salty earth leaves no trace that survives hundreds of thousands of years. What we can say is this: by the time humans were living in communities, growing crops, and building the infrastructure of early civilization, salt was already understood as a specific, valuable, necessary substance. The knowledge did not appear from nowhere when agriculture arrived. It built on something already there. The discovery that salt does something remarkable to food, that it preserves it, was one of the most important technological advances in all of human prehistory, and it almost certainly happened by accident. Meat or fish exposed to naturally salty conditions, a coastal environment, a brine spring, a salt flat, decays more slowly than meat exposed to ordinary conditions. The salt draws moisture out of food and creates an environment hostile to the bacteria responsible for decay. Someone, at some point in the deep past, noticed this. Noticed that food that had been in contact with salt lasted longer. And that observation, that specific, practical, reproducible observation, changed everything. Food preservation fundamentally solves one of the most persistent problems of human existence. Hunting and fishing are intermittent. You kill a large animal, and you cannot eat all of it before it spoils. You catch a huge run of fish, and most of it rots before you can consume it. Preservation converts intermittent abundance into reliable supply. It allows surplus. And surplus is the foundation of everything that follows: trade, storage, population growth, specialization, civilization itself. The oldest preserved fish yet found were salted. Evidence of large-scale fish salting operations exists from ancient Egypt, going back at least 4,000 years. Roman fish sauce, the fermented salted fish product called garum, that was essentially the ketchup of the ancient world, produced it in enormous industrial facilities and traded across the entire Mediterranean, emerged from the same understanding. Salt cod, salt herring, preserved meats, all the preserved food technologies that fed armies, crews, and populations across human history before refrigeration. All of them rest on the foundational discovery that salt stops decay. Once salt was understood as both a physiological necessity and a food preservation technology, it acquired something else: value. Tradable, measurable, portable value. Salt is the earliest confirmed trade good in human history, for which we have substantial evidence. Salt routes, dedicated trade pathways along which salt moved from production sites to populations that needed it, are documented across Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Americas. The Via Salaria, one of the oldest roads in ancient Italy, literally means the salt road. It ran from the salt flats at the mouth of the Tiber River inland to Rome, and it predates Rome as a city. The road existed before the civilization it would eventually supply. The word salary comes from the Latin salarium, a payment connected to salt. The precise historical claim that Roman soldiers were paid in salt is probably not literally true in most cases, but it reflects a genuine historical reality. Salt was so valuable, so consistently in demand, so universally necessary, that it functioned as a unit of account and a medium of exchange across multiple ancient societies independently. It was money before money existed. The great salt mines of Hallstatt in Austria, the ones that have given their name to an entire period of European prehistory, the Hallstatt culture, were being worked at least 3,000 years ago and possibly as long as 7,000 years ago. These were not small operations. They were industrial-scale mining enterprises that produced salt in quantities large enough to trade across significant distances. The wealth that flowed from controlling those mines funded one of the most materially sophisticated prehistoric cultures in European history. In sub-Saharan Africa, salt from the Saharan mines was traded ounce for gold at various points in history. In parts of Ethiopia, pressed salt blocks served as currency well into the 20th century. In the Americas, salt production sites were controlled and fought over by competing groups for thousands of years before European contact. The value of salt was not a European invention. It emerged independently wherever agriculture created populations that needed it and geography made it scarce. So, when did ancient humans start eating salt? The honest answer is that they never really stopped. From the beginning of our evolutionary history, sodium was present in the diet, in the meat and blood of the animals that hunter-gatherers hunted and consumed. Salt, as a specific conscious dietary addition, as something sought and valued and traded and fought over, emerged from the agricultural transition. When the diet changed, the sodium supply changed, and the demand for supplemental salt followed with a speed and force that tells you everything about how biologically necessary it actually is. The craving you feel for salty food is not a modern invention. It is not an addiction created by processed food. It is the same biological signal that drove prehistoric farmers to seek out brine springs, that drove ancient Egyptians to salt their fish, that drove Roman traders down the Via Salaria, and that drove people across every continent to find, extract, trade, and fight over one of the simplest minerals on Earth. Your body knows it needs sodium. It has always known. The way you get it has just changed. For most of human history, getting enough sodium was a genuine challenge that shaped behavior, trade, technology, and the development of civilization in ways that are easy to underestimate from the vantage point of a world where a shaker of it costs almost nothing and sits on every table. The table is recent. The need is ancient. Like and subscribe if you enjoy these videos. I'll see you in the next one.